The following is a live presentation of the Commercial Appeal.
It's something that we talk a lot about. It's our first conference road trip. It is a business trip. Every time we put those suits on to go to Liberty Bowl, it's a business trip. And so, nothing really changes. It's just maybe a little adjustment to our schedule, but we're going down there with one purpose and one focus, and that's to maximize this step and work hard for a victory.
This is the Tiger Football Podcast with Tom Shad, Jeff Calkins, and Phil Stukenborg.
All right, what's up, y'all? We're back. It's Tuesday, and it also happens to be Mike Norvell's 35th birthday. We just got off the practice field, asked him how he's celebrating. He said, working. No surprise. Got some meetings, got to answer all of our fun questions after practice.
35 years old.
Exciting birthday.
Unbelievable. He's done well for his 35 years, I'd say.
Done a little bit as far as football coaching goes.
Nice. Riding helicopters, too, for his 30,
Yeah, how about that?
His 35th birthday. That's nice. Riding helicopters.
A 54-year-old coach wouldn't do that.
Well, no, like they're Dickey, right? Like, I don't know how old he is. He did. He was dragged along for the bumps.
He didn't have a choice.
He was along for the ride.
He had no choice.
And he had a parachute, I think. Yeah.
I did ask... I asked him, I didn't know if someone had donated the helicopter or whatever else. You had a piece today about that. Mm-hmm. And urge people to go to commercialappeal.com to read Tom's piece about the helicopter ride. But they rented it, is what he said. They just went out and rented it. They wanted to make a splash. They went out and rented it and stuck that big Tiger logo on the side. And I like the quote that you had, that he wanted to blow off some hats as they were landing. I do think it makes an impression, don't you?
Yeah. No, and that's something that he had done, at Arizona State. There are pictures of him, back in 2012 or whatever, of him in I can't remember what they called it. Something like the Devil Copter, right, or Sun Devil, whatever. But yeah, I think it does make a difference, and it just creates an effect, more than anything else. Like when you make a grand entrance like that, it just creates I don't know. I don't know how many other coaches. Do you know of any other coaches, or have you seen? Other coaches?
I think Saban has done it before. I've seen. I don't know who else has done it. Obviously you can. It's hard. It's easier to do it for your local schools, and I do think it's a way of indicating. The point that he makes is everyone says, put a fence around your city. Literally everybody says that. But to actually, say, well, here's how we're going to show that it's important to us. I gather Lane Kiffin did, I think, too, at Tennessee. Okay. Lane Kiffin did it at Tennessee too, but didn't produce long-term results there. Then they got a helicopter that actually took them all the way to Los Angeles, and that was that. So, anyway, I thought it was cool.
Yeah. Locally, I think only Jarvis Greer has done that.
Well, 24 hours before Norvell and Dickey were riding around in helicopters, had I don't know if biggest win of the season, you could probably say. Come back from what was a pretty awful, honestly, first half performance, at least offensively. Come back and beat Temple 34-27. I thought it was. I think you could. You have to be discouraged by the first half, right? And I don't know if the offensive performance in the second half leaves you encouraged necessarily, but I think again it shows something about the team to kind of bounce back from a performance like that and then still find a way to win the game on a kickoff return for a touchdown, no less.
Yeah, I think the thing that came out of it, and I know you've talked about it before, is that Chris Long stuck with a plan, right, and didn't, because you looked at it, they weren't running the ball at all, and he knew just to have a couple of runs. I guess two of the runs counted for 75% of the yards for the night, but you did something that eventually worked and got you back on track.
Yeah, I was. First of all, I was stunned by the first half. We'd just seen them move the ball effortlessly against an SEC team. What the hell? I still don't quite understand. Well, you can understand it in two ways, because it's very clear the offensive line is getting overwhelmed. Sure. Right? Even when they're rushing three, the offensive line is getting overwhelmed. And then Riley Ferguson, for the first time this year, was bad. First half was bad. And so that combination, you wonder, will we see more of that? Is that a troublesome issue? Or by the second half, they're never going to just demolish people with their offensive line this year. That's not how it's going to work, right? That's not how they're going to move the ball. They're going to move the ball because they're explosive. Ferguson can find open receivers because they can scheme and because they have lots of gifted playmakers, get the ball into their hands. They're not going to run people over. The second half, they looked like themselves. Even after those runs, you started throwing the ball. You started making some plays through the air. Okay, this is the offense that I've seen all year in the second half. It was troublesome because like those offensive line problems, I presume, are going to persist. But I think the point you make is the biggest one, which is that we've never seen them be challenged yet, and challenged and respond, and they did do that, and I thought that was key.
And what was impressive was to see, Anthony Miller struggle or not get the ball as much as he had been, and Phil Mayhew stepping up in a huge way. Mm-hmm. I mean, the catches he made and the situations he made them in really kept that offense moving in the second half.
Yeah, back to your point about the offense not, kind of trying to find the root of the issue. Norvell said after watching the film, over the weekend, he said it was really it was a matter of missed execution by just a couple people, and he said the people changed, but he said after the first play, everybody was doing what they were supposed to do. And then he said after that, just from a base level of execution, you had people just not doing their jobs, whether it was somebody running the wrong route, somebody missing a blocking assignment, quarterback making a bad throw. He said there were like 20 plays like that in a row, where it was just one or two people making, not doing their jobs. So I don't know.
At the start of the second half, like they just seemed dead. You commented to me, Tom, about how dead the building was, because there was we can talk about this later too, a slightly disappointing number of people showed up, and then B, they were just quiet as could be. They come out at the start of the second half, 3 straight plays in reverse, and I can't believe they came back from that. I mean, it is sort of, it wasn't the biggest deficit ever, but they looked flatlined, and I think your point that you made is exactly right. In one of your pieces, Tony Pollard's getting a lot of attention for the kickoff return, and that was historic and broke whatever else.
Right.
But the key play of that game was very clearly Dorland Dorsey, because before that they'd done nothing, and after that, a lot of good things started to follow. After that, you had suddenly you're sacking them, suddenly you're getting the pick six, suddenly you're getting. I mean, everything flowed from that, including the kick return. But it was that play to be able to run the ball effectively and say, sort of almost emotionally break through is, I think, what turned the game.
Well, and it also feels like, and this I think is kind of becoming a trend for this team, and it's, just in football in general, but when this team gets a big play, they are able to latch on to that momentum really well. I think we've just seen that over the course of the season, that when they get that one big play, you can just look at the Ole Miss game, like when they had the fake punt conversion, they immediately followed up with a 40-yard completion,
right,
and they march down and score, and then they come back and they just look. I think that this, some teams are able to grind it out. I think this team needs a big play, but then once they get that big play, they can kind of latch onto that momentum. And kind of to that point, I did a stat now this was entering the Temple game, but I looked at basically completions of 20 yards or more. I didn't look at plays. I just looked at completions. I was just looking at the downfield passing game, and they've had 15, at least entering the Temple game, 15 completions of 20 yards or more. 14 of those had contributed to a scoring drive. So 14 passes of 20 yards or more had played a role at some point in scoring a touchdown. And so I think that's, kind of speaks to that same point, that they just need to be able to get a big play and then kind of ride the momentum from there. A
coaching staff doesn't want to admit this, but going back to that short turnaround, coming off the Ole Miss game, how much did that contribute to the first half?
Oh, it certainly played a role, I think. And when people talk about like I said last week, like the team is mostly healthy, and that was in terms of people who are going to be available to play the game. But when you play a team like Ole Miss, you're sore. And coming off like a short week like that, there were guys that were playing who probably didn't feel, great. And I think that definitely plays at least some part of a role. Now, I don't think that that's an excuse for missing assignments, and if Norvell's talking about 20 straight plays where guys aren't doing their jobs, I don't know if that's an excuse for that, but I think you can certainly say that it played at least some small role.
And then in the meantime, you had we came out of the Ole Miss game with questions about the run defense, right? We wondered if they'd be able to, being gashed they were by the Rebels for 200-yard rushers, we wondered if that was a sign of weakness. They obviously made adjustments against Temple, and then Temple moves the ball through the air effortlessly. in a way, I mean, the defense was magnificent. The numbers absolutely lie in terms of that game. The defense kept them in it, in a game that they should not have been in. And yet I'm curious, Tom, as to your takeaways about where do we think this defense is now, and what did you think? What did you think we saw, and what did Thursday mean?
I don't know if I completely absolve the defense. I mean, I think that you have to put some weight in the stats, and some of the, like the one that stands out to me was Jahad Thomas is running kind of like wide open down the middle of the field on a seam for a 61 yard. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you can't have happen. But I do absolve them at least to some extent just because of the amount of play. Like, if you look at the time of possession in the first half, I mean, it was ridiculous. I don't remember offhand how many plays Temple ran, but it was ridiculous. And then the fact that in back-to-back weeks, so within a span of 5 days, they had to defend 88 plays in consecutive games, which is just something that doesn't happen. I mean, in college football, I mean, rarely. That's like playing, like a bowl. Like, I think last year Bowling Green had like 92 plays. So you're thinking about doing that like back to back in a span of 5 days. Like, I think that's, and I think that some of the yardage, when you think back to the game, the Temple game was in the second half, and I think you just saw a defense that was gassed. I think, the first half defense at full strength, I think you can take a lot of positives away from, just in terms of, there were like the fumble, Tony Pollard's fumble on the kickoff. Temple starts at the 6-yard line, and that's
got a field goal. That was
to hold them to
key.
A field goal, and that's, I think that's one of those situations where they score a touchdown there, and then they score a touchdown, later in the first half. That game is a little bit more out of hand, and you don't even have a chance to really get back into it. So,
and even when they were exhausted in the second half, they're still making plays and scoring touchdowns.
Right.
Still, I mean, we're back to turning the ball over. To creating opportunities by creating turnovers. So I was heartened by it fundamentally, I think, and obviously they're getting help this week as Brady returns from his injury.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll say about that, and we just wrote the story, today's commercial appeal, but I don't know how much Letarius is going to play. Like, I don't think his return is going to be like, oh, he's out there 60 snaps starting. Right. I think this is a situation. It's a really uncommonly fast return.
It's unbelievable.
From an ACL. And I've had people say, like, every ACL recovery is different, and this one was just unusually fast. And it's not that he's rushing the process at all, and it's not that he's not back to full strength, but it's just an unusually fast thing, and it's going to take a while for him just in terms of stamina. And that's what he was talking about yesterday. He said, I hadn't done this since spring. You get back out to practice and you remember how fast the pace of practice is and how fast the defense wants to go just fundamentally. So I think it is going to take him some time to kind of ease his way back, but definitely a big addition here to the defense.
And you want him back for the stretch run, obviously.
Right.
It'd be nice to have him back for Navy. He game under his belt by the time you play a Navy team that did something fairly significant this past weekend too.
Right, and the other thing that I think is another reason why they'll ease him back probably pretty slowly is that they're playing 2 triple option offenses. Navy cut blocks like nobody's business, and Tulane is not quite the same thing, but they're going to pound the ball. They're just going to try to run it down your throats, and so I think that there might be, they might try to scale him back a little bit because of that. So what were you going to say, Phil?
I was just going to say, in the standard for that return is always been about 9 months. I mean,
right.
That's kind of what you've heard for an ACL. So that 6 month to come back is be interesting to see how he handles it.
Yeah, and he's looked good. I mean, one last thing on Letarius. I mean, he's looked good since the beginning. Like, I saw him fall camp, and he was walking around like he wasn't having a problem. And then you see him doing drills off to the side at practice. He looked pretty good. And then what stood out to me is that they go through pregame warmups, and before the SEMO game at the very beginning of the season, he was out there, and he didn't go through the padded pregame warmups, but before that, before fans are allowed in the stadium, they throw some passes and everything, and he looked fine. You could just tell that he was chomping at the bit, and that's when you kind of said, okay, he's really, really ahead of schedule, because they'd always talked about, mid-October, late October, and that's when you knew that he was going to be back a little bit earlier. I did want to shift, a little bit to Tulane. Do you guys have is there any trepidation about this game? Because I know that Tulane, at least we do power rankings every week, and they're always, 11th or 12th in the conference, but they are 3-2. And I think that there's some differences about this team. Do you guys have any concerns about this game? Any worries that this could be kind of a game that takes them by surprise?
Well, while their competition hadn't been great, they have played well defensively. I mean, that's something that I would look at. Of course, playing that triple option offense is something new for them. As we said historically Memphis has played well there, so I think that's always a good thing. But I don't know.
It helps that historically they're bad.
It does. It also helps.
It's amazing to think back to that glorious Tulane team. The undefeated.
Yeah.
Was it? They were undefeated.
They were undefeated.
Sean King, right?
That was
Sean
as
King.
Bowden was the coach, and
Late 90s.
and it was this glorious year. It was exactly what you don't want Memphis's run to be.
Yeah.
It was a one-hit wonder. It was and then the coach leaves, and it all just you go back to being Tulane, and
Plus, they've only won. They've only won one league game each year they've been in this league. I think. So,
is that true?
Yeah. Isn't that right? I mean, something like that. It's like
it's one or
yeah.
So I mean, I have a hard time getting myself worked up to have much trepidation about it. It is obviously the triple option will be interesting that they're doing that this year. It's different, I gather, than Navy's, than the way Navy does it. Do you have a sense, Tom, of the ways in which it is different? We saw what Navy did, just destroying Memphis, doing anything they wanted, and I think that is a challenge.
So Navy, this was something that I learned, last year, just kind of talking with the old Memphis coaching staff. Like, triple option is literally just having three options on a play. Right. And that was something like in Houston, like Memphis was running triple option plays. It was just completely different from what, Navy does. Like what Navy does is just a very unique thing, just in terms of some of their motions, in terms of some of their blocking schemes. I think you'll see some similarities, but from what I gather, it's going to be a little bit different. So they are running a triple option offense, and there are going to be a lot of misdirections in terms of, fake the ball to this guy, fake the pitch, keep it here, but I don't think it's going to be quite the same as Navy, just in terms of how they execute it, how they go about it.
The other thing to me is you wrote today about Memphis's roots or connections or whatever in New Orleans, and I think that would be interesting just to chat a little bit about. It's something that Mike Norvell has been deliberate about. It's one of their, if you were going to rank recruiting areas for Memphis, you'd say Memphis, obviously. Memphis and the surrounding area would be one. But New Orleans would certainly be Louisiana would be in the top three, don't you think, along with Texas, Oklahoma? What would you say? Where are their priorities?
I think New Orleans is number. I mean, I think
Two?
it's Memphis and New Orleans. Yeah, and then I don't think it's particularly close. I think there's a little gap. I mean, you could say Alabama. They've focused a lot in Alabama. Yeah. They focused a lot.
Fuente got a bunch out of Mississippi.
Well, yeah, but it also, New Orleans worked really well for Tommy West. Go back 10 years with Danny Wimprine and John Doucette, the big tight end. Do you remember him?
I think, in fairness, Rip got Danny. Remember? Because Rip
he
will tell you to this day.
No.
Rip will tell you this day. He should have taken the red shirt off of him.
Yeah.
He said, if I know I was going to get fired, I would have played Danny Wimprine. It was all set up. And but yes,
but New Orleans
has yielded some things before, but it's different, right? Recruiting in New Orleans.
Yeah, and we're gonna have a story on this later in the week, just kind of how they've tried to kind of build inroads there. But that's something that Mike Norvell has recruited the New Orleans area since he was a head coach. David Johnson was one of his first hires when he started the staff, and David Johnson was a former high school coach there. And talking with him yesterday, he said there are more NFL players that come out of the New Orleans area per capita than anywhere else. He just said it's a bunch of guys who don't have, maybe the big shiny stadiums, and high school football isn't quite what it is in Texas, just in terms of like overall feel. It's more of just kind of a grinding, like guys who just love playing football. And I think that is one of the things that really appeals to them, because that's kind of the mentality that they want here. But I think having a guy like David Johnson, I mean, that's a huge pickup, and he's allowed. I mean, just in however many months he's been here, I mean, he was one of the big reasons why he got Josh Perry, the kid who was committed to Alabama, and they got him, 48 hours before signing day or whatever. One of the reasons that they got Damani Coxey, who just joined, as kind of a late qualifier. He was committed to LSU and then didn't make the cut academically, and he's an academic redshirt this year. He'll be eligible for the first year next year. So you can just see, I mean, just guys like that, even in the first however many months that he was here, he was able to get guys like that and has really deep connection. I mean, there are guys who've recruited areas for a while, but David Johnson grew up in New Orleans. He has really, really deep ties there. And I think that just kind of all goes back to, I think Norvell, when he took the job, wanted that to be an area of focus. And, you can see that just kind of in hiring David Johnson as one of his first assistants.
I don't know what else you had on our dance card today to talk about. I did want to ask you, though, about the attendance thing last week. We had talked about how it was a perilous game because it's the time of year when Memphians traditionally say, I got other things to do now, whether it's the Grizzlies or whatever. And even though they won that game, I was stunned when I was driving up to the stadium. I'm like, there's no traffic. I thought there was traffic. There wasn't going to be traffic. And it turned out to be okay.
It
filled in a little bit. What was it,
34, right under 35.
34, but a little disappointing, I think. Don't you think, Phil? Or no?
Yeah, well, look, no, for a weeknight and 35,000 and...
You think it's fine?
Yeah, that's not bad for a weeknight here. I just think because you're not playing. I mean, in the past when they had those big games against Louisville, they were.
You don't think this counted as one of these big Thursday
night
I
just don't
showcases?
Think it's as good as Temple's been in this conference. I don't think they bring the same
emotion.
No, they don't. Not to what Louisville would have been.
Louisville did.
I just thought it was interesting. I kind of tend to agree more with you, Geoff. I mean, just comparing it directly to last year. Last year playing Cincinnati.
Right.
Now, obviously, there was a different vibe. Like Memphis hadn't lost in however many. They had a 10-game winning streak or whatever dating back to 2014. You had Paxton Lynch, Fuente. There was a little bit more of a buzz, but they had 10,000 more people at that game last year in Cincinnati. And the vibe, to me, just the vibe in the stadium was different. And I think part of it had to do with like Arthur Mollett getting that pick six or whatever in the first, that just created this buzz, and it was kind of more of a crazy game, at least in the first half. But that's what kind of really stood out to me about the Temple game is just, there were less people in the stands, but also the vibe was just different. And I think part of it had to do with how the offense came out.
Right.
But it was...
I was certainly happy at the end. It was certainly a happy event at the end. And then we got to celebrate the kickoff return, too. You were there for the Cobb kickoff return, Phil, were you not? You were the beat writer for the team?
Yes.
When 20 years ago?
Something like that.
I was I'd barely gotten here. It was 96?
November
96.
1996.
It was 96. I had gotten here in January of 96. Is when I wrote my first column for the Commercial Appeal. So I was there for that one.
And luckily they couldn't challenge that for Kevin Cobb's sake,
And all the ones since. It really was quite something to watch it unfold, wasn't it? And it's nice that it was a local kid. Yeah. It was nice that it was a local kid who did it, I think. That was
in the story they had. I mean, the stories that came out afterward, they'd all talked about it. It's something that was on their mind. Now they're talking about getting the second one, I guess, is the story you wrote. So it did mean a lot, and those are things that, turn a game around, create a buzz.
And that was something that every talking with James Shebest, the outgoing special teams coach, like that was something entering the 2015 season that he said, this is a goal for us. And I think that's been something that, especially in recent years, everybody has been gunning for it. And, I know Jordan Lower, talking to him after the game, he was excited just to kind of get the monkey off his back.
Now we got to talk about the punt return. When's the last punt return?
When is the last punt return?
It was the opener last year, Roderick Proctor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was like third quarter or something. Yeah, so it hasn't been too long.
Well, the other funny thing is that there are only 2 games of being away from being bowl eligible, right? Isn't it? Right. They have 4 wins,
right? Which
is astonishing to me. I was going back and looking at old columns for the book that I'm doing, and like the year that they went to the New Orleans Bowl, that was such a big deal to get to be bowl eligible. And now,
you've won 23 games in less than 3 years.
And I think people totally take it for granted, which is good. I mean, that's good. You want to be in a position where you're taking that for granted.
Yeah. So we'll wrap it up here. We got Tulane coming up this week, then the big game against Navy, which suddenly has become a much bigger game after they beat Houston, and then Tulsa by the end of the month. So yeah, you could very well be bowl eligible here at the start of November when USF comes to town.
But remember, this podcast only talks about one game at a time.
That's true. We got to take it one podcast at a time.
By the way, he started with the business trip thing. How many coaches have talked about business trips over the years? It's a business trip.
If I had a nickel for every time a coach talked about business trips,
I'd like $1,000.
I could retire at
25.
Every
time a coach talks about business
retire
trips.
at 25. All right, thanks for listening, y'all. We'll talk to you next week.
Like the Commercial Appeal on Facebook and follow on Twitter at Memphis News. This is the Commercial Appeal.